Uh, uh, 6:55. Our heavenly home is bright and fair. I feel like traveling on. Is that the one you want? Okay, that's it. 6:55. My heavenly home is bright and fair. I feel like traveling on. Nor pain nor death can enter there. I feel like traveling on. Yes, I feel like traveling on. I feel like traveling on. My heavenly home is bright and fair. I feel like traveling on. Its glittering towers the sun outshine. I feel like traveling on. That heavenly mansion shall be mine. I feel like traveling on. Yes, I feel like traveling on. I feel like traveling on. My heavenly home is bright and fair. I feel like traveling on. Let others seek a home below. I feel like traveling on. Which flames devour or waves or flow, I feel like traveling on. Yes, I feel like traveling on. I feel like traveling on. My heavenly home is bright and fair. I feel like traveling on. The Lord has been so good to me. I feel like traveling on until that blessed home I see. I feel like traveling on. Yes, I feel like traveling on. I feel like traveling on. My heavenly home is bright and fair. I feel like traveling on. That was one that I can't remember the joke, but it was the one that they sang on the pastoral vote Sunday. They were suggesting. Okay, someone else got a song you'd like to sing?
About
What a day that will be. 283. That's a good one. There is coming a day when no heartache shall come, no more clouds in the sky, no more tears to dim the eye. All is peace forevermore on that happy golden shore. What a day, glorious day that will be. What a day that will be when my Jesus I shall see, and I look upon his face, the one who saved me by his grace. When he takes me by the hand and leads me will be. There'll be no sorrow there, no more burdens to bear, no more sickness, no pain, no more sorrow over there, and forever I will be with the one who died for me. What a day, glorious day that will be. What a day that will be when my Jesus I shall see, and I look upon his face, the one who saved me by his grace. When he takes me by the hand and leads me through the promised land. What a day, glorious day that will be. Amen. That's the truth, isn't it? We're assured of that, and he's coming one of these days, maybe sooner than we think. I don't know. I want to be ready when he does come, I know that. And anybody got a testimony tonight? We'll give you the chance. Something happened that you'd like to share with us, that you'd like to share with us? Well, it's good to have you all here, and so let's just get into the Bible study then. You have something to hand out?
So we've moved on. We're in chapter 11. Getting into the part that everybody gets excited about sometimes. Things are referred to here. I know this has been different than a lot of folks, the way they talk about Revelation. But and I think I've said this before, over 600 verses in the Old Testament are either directly mentioned or are referred to in Revelation. So, as I said before, I don't hear them talk about all of that Old Testament. They talk about parts that they want to pull out, but they don't always kind of pull in a lot of that. Also, people who read Revelation should read the Old Testament, and I don't mean like Ezekiel or those that people always refer to, but the whole thing, to get whenever they see the imagery in Revelation, they know where it came from, a lot of it, okay? And today, where this particular segment, this chapter 11, is referring to two witnesses and then the seventh trumpet. And a lot of people have been talked about the two witnesses. They always want to talk about who they are, right? And so I want to work through this. In Revelation 11:1, it says, "And there was given to me a measuring rod like a staff, and someone said, 'Get up and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship in it. Leave out the courtyard, which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, because it has been given to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. So this reference here is actually if you've read Ezekiel, there will be Ezekiel's told to do that, right? To measure the temple in Ezekiel. So this is not, biblically this is not something new. And it says that there was a measuring rod like a staff that what they intended for him to use to measure the temple and the altar and those who worship in it. So it wasn't just measuring the temple, it was measuring also those who worship in the temple. So the interesting thing there is why would God have John why would God have John measure the temple, or measure the people in the temple who worship there? And the thing is the rod that was given to John he didn't get it himself, that it was given to him. So the rod that is intended to be measured concerning God's holy place is not one that man creates or man picks up or man in some way devises. He didn't get his own measuring rod. And so the importance there has to do with God taking assessment of the temple and the people in it. So to think about what that means and what the rod would be, what kind of measuring stick would he use, and why does God want this? God gives John his measuring rod of justice to evaluate the holy place where he has put his name. And in Isaiah 28:17 it says, "And I will make justice the measuring line, and righteousness the plummet, and hail will sweep away the refuge of lies, and waters will overwhelm the hiding place or the shelter." And in this particular chapter, God is speaking to Israel or Jerusalem, and he's talking about, because he lists all the things that they're doing that are a rebellion against him. And then he says, and it also talks about the cornerstone in that same chapter. He says, but I will create something that measures the justice and the righteousness. And so here we see that God is having John measure the temple. And so this aspect of God and his righteousness and his justice measuring the people of God. The idea of that aspect of what he expects in the place where he has put his name. But he says, leave out the courtyard, which is outside the temple. Do not measure it. It has been given to the nations, and they will trample the holy city. The courtyard of the Gentiles is not measured, meaning that there's no relationship to the justice and righteousness of Christ. Does anybody in reading Acts, do you remember whenever they had a riot there at the temple, and they accused Paul of taking a Gentile into the temple? Actually, there was a outer section in Herod's temple that had a low wall that stretched around it, okay? Inside of there was the courtyard of Israel, and then there was the Holy of Holies, the actual temple, the temple itself with the holy place and the Holy of Holies. That low wall, everything outside of that was the actual courtyard outside the temple was large, would be where the Gentiles could come in to that area. If they went beyond that low wall, that you'd have what they had there in Acts, which is a riot, okay? That they brought a Gentile into the courtyard of God. And so we see here that God is now, in this chapter, He's separated the place of His name, the holy place, the courtyard, the outer area, and then the courtyard of the Gentiles, separated it in the measuring of it, okay? And so the idea that the Gentiles will trample that area is that it conveys the implication of dominance and possible destruction. The act of treading or trampling is associated with a conquest and victory. And so the question I've got here is, what is meant that the Gentiles will trample the holy city for a short time? What do you think that refers to? In Luke 21:24, Jesus said this. He says, "And they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all the nations," talking about Israel, "and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled." I don't know if you've ever read that before, where Jesus says that Jerusalem will be trampled, okay? Of course, this is before Revelation's written, okay? And that aspect of the holy place where God has put His name, Jerusalem being trampled, okay, by that. You guys know how many religions there are in Jerusalem? How many major religions are there? There's Christianity. There's the Judeo or Jewish religion, and then there's Islam. In fact, where Abraham's tomb is, both Islam and Israel claim Abraham. And where that tomb is, they've built a structure around it, and one side goes in one side and the other side goes in the other. They can see through bars and see the actual tomb, the actual covering where his body really is supposed to be. And it's interesting that aspect of these, where God put His name for Israel, all these others are there also, and brought religions in and are doing what is mentioned here, trampling it. Do you know when the trampling of Jerusalem began? The Gentiles taking over? 70 AD. And they destroyed the temple, left it in a ruin until I think his name was Solomon came, took over, and then they built the Dome of the Rock on that place. Okay? Because they also claimed that the cave that's there, one of their holy people was involved. Two to think about that aspect of what's actually happened in there. And God's saying this through John, but he's saying it at a time when the temple's already been destroyed. When John wrote this, AD 70, he was past that by 20 years or so. Okay? And so to get a grasp on how God's plan is playing out here. And so the question is, when will it be that the Gentiles will trample Jerusalem, which was AD 70? Jesus also states that that the trampling will continue until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So, when is that? Has that happened? Has the time of the Gentiles been fulfilled? So the question I've got is, after over 1,800 years, or right around 1,900 years later, in 1948, Israel was declared a nation, right? And so Israel came back to their land. And the Bible talks about that in the Old Testament, in Isaiah and a few other places. It talks about that he will gather them and bring them back into the land, and he will deal with them there. So the question I've got is the Gentiles, the time of the Gentiles waning? And how is that playing into this aspect of what God's saying here concerning the Gentiles? Okay? To look at how this history has played out, even though this last few weeks I've been doing a little investigation concerning some theology that's out there, and they don't necessarily believe some of this stuff, this theology. Contemporary, there is a theology out there called contemporary theology. People have written books about it, and they don't necessarily believe these things, even though when I look at the Bible, I see the history that played out in past the time of the New Testament. Okay, to see the events that have happened, and for me, and that's the reason I say before that whenever I began to study this, it did more for me and my faith and assurance concerning God's plan across the eons of time, and so for me it was an affirmation that God has been in control. Sit down. That God has been in control. Kira, stop. And that he's been in control this whole time. And I hear people sometimes talk about that, that somehow God's not in control, or they talk about that the Christians and the Jews, seems like things are not going well for them. And when I see the history that has been stretched across time for the last 2,000 years, I see that God's plan, God's kingdom, is coming to fruition in the way that he talked about. And to realize that the things that he said concerning Jerusalem have come to be and continue. There is what? Yes. To realize that what God has said, that many theologians don't believe this, and so they move dates of when books were written, in the New Testament, they move it around. For instance, this prophecy that Jesus said in Luke here, they because of the temple being destroyed, they say that it was after the temple was destroyed that Luke was written, so that could be written in to the gospel. Okay, But there's other things that prove, having to do with times of things that are mentioned in these Gospels, that prove that that is not the case. So to look at these in a critical way, but not only that, know what the Old Testament is talking about, what it says that is part of what's going on in Revelation. They claim that, I'll put it this way, I did the search and AI told me this, okay? I don't know, he's this guy I see a lot and hear about a lot. Yeah. So, but it puts it in a narrative for me, okay? Like it's talking to me. But it says that Luke wasn't written until 80 AD to 110 AD, okay? And their reasoning is because of this very verse, this very prophecy mentioned here. But the thing is that what is said in the Gospels and in Revelation is also talked about in the Old Testament, okay? There is a corroboration between them, okay? And so we see that there's a thing that's going on and is going on today that we see in the news that is happening with the Gentiles and with Israel. And so, in our Bibles, to actually study these things out, to know them, so that whenever you're having a conversation, thank you, to actually study these things out, to know them in your conversations with those that you meet, okay? Because believe me, there are Christians out there who go to church, who hold to theology, who don't necessarily agree or believe these things. I was watching a video yesterday having to do with a theologian who has written a book called Contemporary Theology. And in that book, he claims 38 theologies. Sit. He claims 38 theologies in there. Everything from the Islam to liberation theology. They're all in there, okay, as part of what they teach in their seminary as factual. And some of it has to do with the occult also in there. And I find it interesting that they mix these things together, okay, regardless of what the Bible says, the history of the Bible, or how that the Old and New Testament witness of each other in there. And so this is a precipitous thing. This particular, these verses here are precipitous. The measuring of the temple is a preparation for what's to come next in the rest of this chapter. Because after that, it says in Revelation in verse 3, 11:3, it says, I will grant authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, which, whenever you figure it out, that's 3.5 years. Clothed in sackcloth. These are 2 olive trees and 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And if anyone wants to harm them, fire flows out of their mouths and devours their enemies. And if anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this way. These have the power to shut up the sky so that rain will not fall during the days of their prophesying, and they have the power over waters to turn them into blood, and to strike the earth with every plague as often as they desire. When they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them, and their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. So, and looking at this, to consider what it's saying here, there's something going to happen here. Once the temple has been measured, then these things begin to happen. The witness is sent. The witnesses are sent. Once the temple has been measured, God grants authority to his two witnesses in the court of the Gentiles, where they will witness for a time and a half. That's from Daniel. Okay? 3.5 years. And I'm not going to get into the 3.5 years, when that happens, what it means, or anything like that. But it's a short period of time, is what it is. Have you thought about when Christ told them that I come quickly? This is before he ascended, okay? How long has it been? 2,000 years. And he said it was a short period of time. So if you take the Old Testament and New Testament together and you think about and look at what God has done throughout that time across this earth, among not just Israel, but within the nations, the period of time of 2,000 years is not very long. And things have happened during this time, during the time of the 2,000 years, that's never happened before, okay? And one of the things is, in a short period of time, within 100 years, the gospel began to spread, and by the time of Constantine, when they started putting the cross on the war shields, okay, it had spread around the Mediterranean. If you pull up a map of the Roman Empire, of everything that they controlled, and you pull up a map of the church and where they were, it goes through that whole area, that same area. So basically, you could say, you could say that the Roman Empire became the mission field of the church. I mentioned this before. The Roman Empire, ordained by God, provided some things that facilitated the spread of the gospel. And the Greek Empire also provided some things that facilitated the gospel. And one of those was the Greek language. Okay? Our Bible, our New Testament is written in Greek. And the roads and the laws and the control of the areas that the gospel went by Pax Romana allowed that spread. Okay? But that's just a coincidence, right? To recognize that. Now, has anyone ever heard anyone say what the witnesses are? You ever heard them name them?
The two witnesses?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who are they?
The law and the prophets.
Okay, that's one, but that's not the one that most people talk about, right?
No, that's what my dad talks about.
Okay. The law and the prophets, okay.
Yes.
Has anyone ever heard them talk about Enoch and Elijah? Neither one of those died, right?
Yeah.
Right? That is sometimes a popular opinion, okay? A guy in 236 AD by the name of Hippolytus, okay, came up with that. That was in 236 AD that he did that. By the way, this same man did not like the Pope, so he set himself up as the Pope, became the anti-Pope, and then there were two other popes that came along, and then he ended up being executed as a heretic, okay? And I find that interesting, having to do with the history of where this idea came from, okay? But the Bible actually provides an imagery. And so this verse says, these two, it refers to the two witnesses in sackcloth. It says, these are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. That does not sound like Elijah to me, okay? And if anyone wants to harm them, fire flows out of their mouth and devours their enemies. And so if anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this way. I mentioned this way back, having to do with two olive trees. I don't know if you remember the image that I had up where it had two olive trees and a lampstand between with oil going into them. The verse there in Zechariah 4:10, it says, "For who has despised the day of small things? But these seven will be glad when they see the plumb line in the hand of Zerubbabel." So there is a connection here that is talked about. It says, "These are the eyes of the Lord which range to and fro throughout the earth." Then I said to him, "What are these two olive trees on the right of the lampstand and on its left?" And he answered me, saying, "Do you not know what these are?" And I said, "No, my Lord." And in Zechariah 4:14 it says, "And he said, These are the two anointed ones who are standing by the Lord of the whole earth." So in Zechariah, it refers to these two olive trees. Okay? And the interesting part here is that they stand before the Lord. To think about what that means, that at that time, God was referring to olive trees that witness for him, actually. Okay? They stand before the Lord. And as Bobby said, it could be the law and the prophets. But actually, Zechariah tells us who they are. And then one of the hints here is the plumb line in the hand of Zerubbabel, right? Plumb line being a rectitude, a vertical, a perfect measurement or plumbing of something, okay? And so you begin to think about Christ in regard to the aspect of who they are. The two witnesses clothed in sackcloth in mourning sackcloth in the Bible meant mourning and humility. To mourn for sin in humility, okay? And so they were witnessing wearing sackcloth. Prophecy for 3.5 years, which in the Bible can be traced through the Old and New Testaments. In Genesis 2:1-3, creation is completed in 6 days. The seventh day, God rested, enjoying Sabbath. So 3.5 may represent God's perfect plan, plan's completion, half done. halfway done. Okay? The two witnesses are two olive trees, oil of the Holy Spirit, and two lampstands, the light of God. Whenever we read through and I've mentioned this before about the holy place, that the only light that was in there was the lampstand, and it was lit by the fire of God that fell on the altar outside. And so this light has to do with God's light. These olive trees has to do with the oil of the Lord, the Holy Spirit. Then I said to him, the angel who talked with me, what are these two olive trees on the right side of the lampstand and on the left side? Then he said to me, these are the two sons of oil, Joshua the high priest and Zerubbabel the prince of Judah, the two anointed ones who stand before the Lord of the whole earth as his anointed instruments. And what did it say about these guys? It says the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. Basically the same language. Okay? And so to think about Jesus, Kira, to think about Jesus holding both offices, the prince and the priest, that this is a witness to the whole earth. Zerubbabel, the prince of Israel, that's olive tree 1, and Joshua, the high priest, olive tree 2, represents two offices, the throne of David, the high priest, and the high priest, or God's anointed ruler and God's anointed intercessor. So these witnesses are witnessing to the earth of who God is. These two witnesses represent the absolute redemptive authority of God and the absolute protection and guidance of God, the scepter and the staff in the hand of Christ, as Jacob's prophesied of Judah. You know, Jacob prophesied. Actually, Jacob, when he blessed his sons as he was going to die, he blessed them with prophecies. And so what Judah, or what Jacob said concerning him, says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Okay? So there's an authority here that came through Judah. The two offices of priest and of king there. The law and the prophets do bring judgment. They also bring salvation. As I've mentioned before, the gospel brings both of those things. Kira? Come up here and sit down. Right here. We see here that having to do with the two witnesses, there is a connection to the Old Testament and a connection to Christ and a connection to the two offices that we talk about Christ. Now, they could be truly two individuals. And so to consider what this is saying to us, concerning what God is trying to get across to to those who believe in Him, to those who follow Him, concerning what kind of authority He's going to have here in at this time. As I've said before, this is a revelation of who Jesus Christ is. A revelation is the revelation of Jesus Christ. To consider that when we read these things. God's two witnesses have the power to bring judgment upon peoples, tribes, languages, and nations of the earth, humanity's dominion. So I've said this before, earth is the domain of man. God in Genesis 1 said, subdue the earth, okay? And so when you read in the Old Testament, you read through it, you hear God telling that His judgment will come through what He does to the earth. And these prophets, or these witnesses who prophesied, when they speak, things happen to the earth, okay? There is a destruction that goes on. To consider what this is saying to us, and considering how that God in His witness interacts with the earth, interacts with us, interacts with His creation. And I'll stop right here at this item 8.
So that you can see how all of this fits into the total picture of the Scripture. Okay? Make sense?